You imagine if the NFL didn't have Roger Goodell, but they had 9 Roger Goodells to try to make decisions for a national football league?
That'd be a lot of booze.
It would be, there'd be a lot of booze. Well, you couldn't get anywhere.
Go out on a stage together, it'd be too loud.
Exactly. Yeah. But you'd be spinning your wheels because this conference or this AFC North commissioner thinks this is good for the Steelers, and the NFC South thinks this, and it's like that's what we have. So we don't have a commissioner. We don't have one voice that's trying to govern the nation. We still have individual branches that are trying to look through a lens of the nation, but they're only worried about what's in it for them.
There is only one sport in the world that pairs piles of fanatics and amateurs. That is college football. Each week, millions tune in to watch not the best, but the AAA affiliate. Try and think of a parallel to that. It does not exist. The biggest stadiums in the world? Most of them were built to watch 18 to 22-year-old college football players, boys who would be trounced by the men that play on Sundays in the NFL. But of course, that's not all of college football. A large part of the sport's beauty is found in its forgotten places, the Pullmans, Corvallis, towns named Boone. And that beauty has been under attack recently. Realignment, NIL, transfer portal, the last 4 to 5 years have completely changed the natural preserve that was college football, a hurricane of what-ifs, suits, and even the president recently via his executive order. One man has been in the eye of that storm.
If the NFL has an issue, Roger Goodell, the owners, the NFLPA, they work things out. Who is that in college football? You tell me.
Kirk Herbstreit has been hosting College Gameday for 30 years now, the feel-good show that brings you to these little corners of our college football constellation. Kirk sat down with me to discuss these changes, the upcoming season, and something a little bit more personal to him, his challenging upbringing. I'm Michael MacKelvie, and this is my conversation with Kirk Herbstreit. From your book, I'm going to read a line here. As I walked through the terminal in Detroit, my pager buzzed. It had a thin LCD screen just wide enough to show about a dozen characters, but I recognized the number. I found a payphone and called him back. Well, he said, you got Gameday. What was that like?
Well, obviously life-changing, but at that moment, this was the spring of 1995. I was working for ESPN for less than a year. I worked for their college football package doing sideline reporting, and I worked with Dwayne Statz and Todd Christensen, and was just kind of learning as I was going as a sideline reporter. And then I think I did an okay job, and they asked me a few months later, hey, arena football season is coming up. We'd love for you to be an analyst for our package. And I said, sure. So I was in the middle of my arena football package. And by the way, that was the year Kurt Warner played for the Iowa Barnstormers. So we were always yeah, ironically. So we were doing Iowa games all the time, Iowa Barnstormer games in Des Moines all the time. So I'm guessing I was connecting through Detroit to Des Moines, more than likely. But yeah, I got that old school pager, call my attorney. I didn't have an agent, just my attorney, who was really more of a friend. And I had tried out. I did an audition. They told me, you're not going to get the job. You're 25, but it'd be a good experience for you. Craig James had just left, and it'd be just a good experience for you to go through the audition. I thought I failed the audition. I was terrified. I was a huge fan of College Gameday, even back then. Lee Corso and Chris Fowler were flown in, and I was sitting next to them and just, but I think what I said was okay, but I was just anxious. And I kind of walked out like, I definitely didn't get that. They already told me I'm not going to get it. And then that, and then I get, hey, call me. So I call him from a payphone. I had a Sprint card. So I, that 1-800. You're probably too young, but you used to call on a Sprint on a payphone. You'd hit the 1-800 number and go ba-boom, and then you dial your number. And I dialed it, and he answers, and he didn't really beat around the bush. He said, you got it. You got Gameday. And people are walking by. I'm standing at a payphone. Very different era than this time, but I was just like in a trance. I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, are you serious? Like, he goes, no, like they want to sign you to a 3-year deal. And I was just, I was young and had no idea what I was doing at that time, and was just so beyond fired up for the opportunity. And I just wanted to go to work, and I was in the latter part. It was probably in the summer. I was near the end of my arena season, and, it was maybe a month, it's about like right now, it was about a month away from things getting started. And I just was overcome, even with emotion, just standing there as people were walking by, probably looking at me like, what's wrong with that guy? But I was just so excited and just to be a part of that show and to kind of get kickstarted.
Yeah. I mean, that had to be pretty wild because you were calling Kurt Warner games?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So was he bagging groceries?
Hunky Cooper for Arizona. Jay Gruden was the quarterback of the Tampa Bay Bandits. I think it was the Bandits.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I would every week, I would leave and go do all these arena games. Didn't know a thing about arena football, but learned pretty quickly. There were always shootouts and 1 and 2 play drives for touchdowns. And Kurt Warner was a beast, and he would tell you if he were on here that his experience in that league and how the quick decision making and the accuracy and getting the ball out had a lot to do with why Mike Martz fell in love with his potential of playing in the NFL. And that year, he was the MVP. They won it all. That year is why the Rams ultimately gave him a chance. They had Trent Green as kind of their guy that they had signed to a big deal, but they brought him in just because of the way he played that year. And I probably called, I don't know, five or six of his games and had no idea that he would become who he is, a Hall of Fame quarterback. Wild. But always loved doing Iowa Barnstormer games because of him, and pretty ironic, all these years later, he had a pretty good career, and my career turned out pretty good myself.
Yeah, I mean, he had to have had like a Toby Keith moment of sorts there. Like, how do you like me now? I mean, was he bagging groceries at that time?
I know I'd love to run into him and talk to him about it because I obviously saw the movie and know his story. Those guys back in 95, I don't think they were making a lot of money. Yeah. And I don't think if you interviewed him and you said, hey, you're about to go off and become a NFL Hall of Fame quarterback, he would have never thought that was a reality. But yeah, I mean, that was right in the middle of, if you go back and watch that movie, you'll hear me and our crew. I think they have a few moments where it's us calling the game. But yeah, it was cool. It was fun to see that.
I haven't actually seen the movie. I just know.
Oh, you should. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I just know his story. But did you start doing arena games then straight out of Ohio State? Because you went to Ohio State and then you worked in radio or something like that after? Yeah.
So I graduated in spring of '93. I was a business major. I had pharmaceutical opportunities, medical sales. I realized the NFL wasn't going to happen for me, and I didn't want to be those. There were a lot of guys at Ohio State at that time that they put all their eggs in that basket. And if the NFL didn't work out, they'd bounce around from the Arena League. There was a league called the World League. They were just trying to kind of keep afloat and keep their. I didn't want to be that guy. I was like, if the NFL's there, great. Wasn't. And it was like, okay, I got to turn the page. I just thought I'd get into business. I'm a huge sports fan. So I grew up as a kid. If you were in my car as a teenager, I grew up in Southwest Ohio. So you're either listening, if you're in my car on a Friday night to go party, it's either the Reds are on radio or 700 WLW Sports Talk. Like that was just that's all my car was ever on. And when I got done at Ohio State, I reached out to a couple local AM stations to just see if there might be a possibility of me getting a start in talk radio, even though I had these traditional paths of business. And I got a call back from one of them, said, ironically, we're going to an all sports format. And I was a captain and even MVP the previous year of the team at Ohio State. And it was like, hey, how great would it be to start an all sports show with a former quarterback? So they hired me, paid me $12,000 a year, which I thought was massive, and had me do sideline reporting for they were the voice of Ohio State football. So I would be down there just doing sideline reporting, making reports about injuries or strategy or whatever it might be. So I did that in 93 and 94, just did a local gig, in Columbus, Ohio, which is a pretty big market to start out in, and just thought I'd probably do that. I got a couple opportunities with local TV, doing some Friday night high school football reports, not calling games, but just the helicopter would fly to a couple, 2 or 3 games of the week. And I would do, we're here at Upper Arlington for the game of the week, that kind of thing. Did that for a year, maybe half a year. And then I kept getting people saying, you need to put a tape together and send it to ESPN and ABC. And so I did. I did a fake tape. I had Eddie George, who was won the Heisman for Ohio State. I had Joey Galloway, played for the Seahawks.
Just a couple okay players.
Yeah. They were buddies of mine. And I kind of created a show called Buckeye Corner just on my own and had them as my guests, and just like you and I are doing right now.
Where did you do this?
I did it at the local studio where I did those high school. It was a CBS affiliate.
Okay, so you had them into the studio.
Yeah, I'd bring them into the studio and just kind of ask, hey, is it okay if I borrow the studio? And all I need is 30 minutes. And I just needed something to put on a tape because I had no TV. I had no TV experience. So I ended up, I had no idea how to make a tape, but I did about 20 minutes of my talk show that I was doing. I did about 10 or 15 minutes of that, moment with Eddie George and Joey Galloway. And then I went to Ohio Stadium in February. There's empty stadium. It's gray. It's cold. And I did like 2 or 3 fake sideline reports, like with either Keith Jackson or Brent Musburger throwing it down to me. Hey, thanks, Brent. Down here. And I would just did a couple of those.
Student section is wild right now.
Right. And I did that for, and I put all those things on a makeshift old school tape and sent it, and almost forgot about it after a few months. And I got a response from ABC Sports that said, thanks, we'll put this on file. There's nothing available. We appreciate you sending this tape. And I didn't hear anything back from ESPN. And then finally a few more months go by, and they reached out and flew me in it. They wanted to fly me in for just an audition that I ended up doing with a guy named Jack Edwards, an old Sports Center guy. And he got the short straw, so he had to come in. And, we did a little bit of, we did a studio show where he was a host and I was the analyst. And then they told me to prepare and sent me some notes on Georgia, Alabama from the previous year. They sent me a bunch of information, and man, I put probably 10 or 15 hours into that prep for that board that I made for that. And after we got done doing the studio portion, they go, okay, now we're gonna do the game. I don't know if you have any material. I reach into my bag, so proud, pull out this masterpiece of a board that I did. I had so many notes on it, and opening kickoff, Georgia, Eric Zier gets the ball, maybe 2 or 3 plays. I'm firing all kinds of stuff out there, and they're like, okay, thanks a lot. And I thought we were going to do the whole game. I'm like, what the heck? I did all this work, and I just called 2 or 3 plays, and we're done. So I didn't really know what to think of that. And then I went home, and then again, about another 4 or 5 months later, they called me and offered me a position as a sideline reporter. So yeah, I was still juggling local radio. I got done doing any kind of TV, and I just started to work for ESPN. And in the fall of 1995, as just a sideline reporter for a news station called ESPN2. It had just started, and I was just traveling around and doing games as a sideline reporter. And then that led into the arena, which then led into the Gameday audition, which I ended up getting. And this will be my 30th year this fall on College Gameday. It seems like it's flown by.
That's wild. Yeah, 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, my family is actually background in radio. My grandpa had a radio station in Spokane Valley, and he was like the voice of the valley there for like 40 years. And
oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, hired my dad. And I just remember my dad telling me that he would always call and just like, my grandpa would call my dad and just be like, stop talking and just play the music.
Yeah.
he was always getting upset.
What kind of radio, did it change over the years?
Yeah, I'm not sure, like as far as the style. I think it was kind of
like oldies, but it was playing music of some kind?
It was playing music, but then my grandpa did the morning shows, and this was back when you could just start a radio station. So he just started this radio station in the 50s in Spokane, and had it for I think 50 years. And that was, radio was obviously much bigger back then.
Oh, huge.
Yeah. So one of the things too that I think really kind of surprised me just reading your book is, I think just your perception, and you admit this in the early pages, just like, hey, I've been called this, I've been called, kind of the golden child. I think Armin Kedian called you the golden child of college football at one point, and you got like 17 golden retrievers. So it's, it's all running in parallel there.
Yeah.
But, in your words, you came from a broken family. Is that right?
Yeah. Writing that book was hard for me because I'm kind of a shy, introverted guy, even though I work on TV. For whatever reason, because I love what I do so much, I'm at ease talking to a camera, in front of millions of people. That doesn't bother me. But if I have to get up in front of a room with 22 people in it and stand up, that bothers me. Going back to just the way I'm wired, I can't help it. Through repetition, I've learned to get more comfortable with it. But it was hard for me to open up in that book. And Gene Wojciechowski, who wrote the book, first of all, he was a friend. So it was easier to be honest with him. He had talked with my mom, who's still alive. My dad has passed away. But I had a very complex, challenging way of being raised. I was in middle America, in Ohio, the heartland, and my first 8 years of my life were, if you ever see the movie Sandlot, that was my life. I was the youngest kid with a rat pack of kids, boys, girls, and all we did in that era was play outside, and that was all you did. And I was the youngest guy trying to keep up, and it was heaven. Whether you're catching lightning bugs or playing in the creek or playing backyard football or wiffle ball, or, if it was the winter, we'd make up a hockey game out in the street. It was really kind of like, for me, that it was just get my work done, my chores done, or whatever, schoolwork, and just sprint outside, playing a swing set. There was always kids just everywhere. And then that stopped when I was 8 years old. Into my second grade year, my mom and dad got a divorce. And my dad was, my hero, because I was such a sports nut. Not because I was trying to impress him. It was just, that was my calling, every sport. And he was the guy that I kind of watched him with. I had an older brother and an older sister, and I was probably the one that was really immersed with it in every way you can imagine. And now he he moved out, and my mom and I and my siblings moved to a different town. And then my dad kind of was out of my life there for a while. He remarried. And to go from having, I think I say in the book, something like Superman or Zeus or like that, my dad was like a superhero. And then to not have him in my life was pretty challenging. And then my mom remarried to a guy that I had to be super fake around and uncomfortable. He wasn't abusive in any way, but I just never really cared for it. So I had to be phony, and act like I was having a good time, and saw my dad here and there, but not a ton. And then my mom ended up divorcing that guy after a couple years. And then I moved in with my dad, and he was married to a lady I didn't really like. And so I ended up going to 6 or 7 schools in about 8 years. And, my brother had some stuff that he was going through that I really don't talk about and still don't really talk about publicly. And so, there was just a lot of different things going on. And my escape during all that was sports, playing sports, watching sports, whatever, my friends, hanging out with my friends became my outlet. And so it was a you're a kid, you persevere through it. But really wasn't until I got to maybe high school where things started to kind of settle in for me, probably in around 11th grade, where I kind of got my feet under me and felt more comfortable in my personal space in life. But it was not the ideal situation on many fronts.
Yeah, it's my mom used to say you never know what goes on behind closed doors, and it's just so true. And I think those family issues, those imperfections, they're just not publicly made. And then for me, at least, it was piecing things together as I got older that, just kind of fly over your head because you're just like, well, what are we doing after school today?
Yeah.
You're not thinking, okay, why were the police at our front door here at
right.
4 p.m. on a Tuesday, like any sane adult would think? You're just like, okay, they just asked for my parents. And then you go grab them. And so, it's a really, I think, just strange dynamic. But I mean, again, it's like you just don't know what goes on.
You don't know,
doors.
You don't know. And I would say this, Michael, it's important because I've done these interviews, and especially when my book first came out, and I would inevitably say something that would end up getting on social media, and it would hurt my mom because she would read this or read just a small quote, and I've tried to tell her, listen, I have zero resentment towards you or towards my dad. They did the best they could, just like I try to do the best I can. I make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but I love my mom. I don't have any resentment. If anything, I admire what they dealt with and what they had to overcome. It's hard. That's why when I wrote this book, it was not a how-to book. It was just more of a, here's my stuff kind of thing. And here's what I've good and bad. And here's what I've been through. And I just wanted to share it because I think there's stuff that you can share that all of a sudden somebody's going through maybe what I went through, and it gives them hope, whether it's, and we could talk more about these other things, but whether it's like being a kid, 8 or 9 years old, and all of a sudden your world is divided. And now you go to mom's or dad's Thanksgiving, Christmas, like all these things, your world has changed. And that's hard to get through. And yet I made it through, and hopefully maybe there's parents that are going through that. And it's like, man, I want my son to hear this. So I decided that's why I wanted to open up. I talked about, dealing with at Ohio State when I went through adversity and I was ready to quit, and seeing a sports psychologist. And back in the 90s, that was like unheard of.
I bet.
But I thought, man, if there's people that maybe you're thinking about dealing with a psychologist, maybe hearing that I talk about it very openly and it's okay. And I encourage you to go see somebody to talk to. But when I walked in, me personally, I had to look over my shoulder to make sure no one was looking at me going into his office, because I didn't want to be made fun of. I didn't want to be like, And so I talked about that. I talked about having premature babies. week 28, and they're 2 pounds each. And I could take my ring off of my finger and go down their foot all the way up to their hip bone, because their legs were about the width of a pen, and their skin was transparent. And I never knew anything about the NICU. I never knew anything about premature births until I experienced it, and I opened up, about that. And so there's a lot of things that I got into in that book, and it really had more to do with, hopefully, and I've gotten so much feedback from people, but hopefully it resonates with some people and said, wow, I didn't know you went through that. I went through something like that. And that's why I decided to kind of push through it. As I got more and more uncomfortable opening up my heart, I decided that was probably the thing that encouraged me the most, was hoping that it like I said, it would resonate, or people would be able to realize, wow, I didn't know he went through that. And that gives me encouragement and hope, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you made the right choice, and I think that's really cool. And a big part of what makes that story coming from you unique is you really are, I know the golden child thing, kind of coming from, Armageddon, but you're just so polished in your analytical takes and just these split second reads that you make on camera. I mean, people just don't understand, I think, like how much prep that probably takes.
Yeah.
And just this lifelong memory card of sorts that you have that you're drawing from that really is unique given just all the experience you have. So somebody in that role that every Saturday is, seen nationwide, looking as buttoned up as can be in a lot of ways, right? And so dialed in, coming from, this situation, which is obviously imperfect, like all of us.
Yeah.
I really do think that's what helped it carry a lot more weight as I was reading it. And, I'll be honest, I planned on just talking to you about just kind of college football pieces, but I was reading this, I was like, man, this is just, I wouldn't have expected this. And I'm also just really appreciative that you wrote it. Yeah,
I appreciate that. And I do think, based on the feedback that I've gotten, I get a lot of people that reach out. I think a lot of people were surprised, and I think it's just another example of, like, you see somebody and you think that they're who they are based on whatever their appearance is or whatever their job is or however they carry themselves. I tell a story in my book about, I was in 11th grade, maybe 11th or 12th, and huge project. And it was a speech. I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks. I was terrified to give this speech. And I finally just talked myself into saying, I'm just not going to do it. It's not worth going up in front of that class to do it. And here I am, the football player, and, again, the stereotype of, like, the jock that, whatever. And I was just like, I'm not going up there. And the teacher, eventually she called on me, and I said, I'm good. And she said, you're good? And I said, yeah, I'm okay. And she goes, this is 25% of your final grade. And I said, okay. Like, in my head, I was like, I don't, I'll fail the class. Like, I'm not going up there. Like, that's how, and I'm not really a draw a line in the sand kind of guy, but I had worked myself up so badly for a couple weeks. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And when your mind plays, can be a very powerful thing. And so I took a 0 on it. And to think that person that took a 0, that couldn't stand up in front of 18 students and give his oral presentation in high school, becomes the same guy that talks, in front of millions of people for a job. It's just, again, my hope is there's a mom out there that has a son is painfully shy, and she's just like, I don't know how I'm going to get him out of this, and hopefully they hear my story, and maybe that'll offer some encouragement, because that's a pretty common thing. And in my case, I in 4th grade and 5th grade and 6th grade, everything was fine getting up, but I'd moved so many times and it was so painful and hard for me to do that in 9th grade, I got up to get up a speech in class, because at that time in life I was doing it. And I started to give my speech, and the prettiest girl maybe in the whole school was in the front row. And I was not, like into girls or a womanizer. I was just kind of into sports. But I had to stand up there. I knew she was pretty. I had to stand up there and give my speech, and I could just feel myself getting hot, probably because she was right there, and I was sweating, and I could feel my face, literally feel it being hot. And she pointed at me, not that she was being mean, but she was just surprised to see me sweating and hot and red. She goes, "Look how red his face is." And the whole class was like, like that. And I was like, in my head, I thought, I will never give another speech again.
I mean,
like
it's just traumatizing too, like high school.
Traumatizing.
Yeah.
I'm 14 or 15 and to go through that, I was like, just humiliated. And so that's why I was in that frame of mind pretty much my whole high school into college, really.
Yeah, I mean, those moments stick with us. I can still remember Josh Siciliani, 8th grade football, pointing at me and saying, "Michael hasn't had a girlfriend yet." And I was like, it's over for me,
Right. Yeah,
I was in
it's
front of the
one
entire
thing.
Football team, and I was like, I don't have a girlfriend. I might not ever find a woman. I don't know. But that's how you carry it, like in those moments. And it can alter things for people. So, I mean,
labels are powerful when you're in that vulnerable state. 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. Those are tough years. Raising 4 boys, I saw it through a different lens, and it's just very, very challenging for sure.
Now you're 30 years into Gameday, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a completely different person than, maybe turning red there in front of the high school audience. But, I guess you've seen just so much change, right? There's so much tenure in that you have just been along for this ride. And one of the things I'm just curious about as you stare out at the landscape, I mean, we have the president now issuing executive orders. I mean, commenting on this stuff, right? And it's gotten to that point. And I guess I'm just curious, with your tenure, as you look out at the college football landscape, what is it that you maybe are most fearful of?
There's so much to be fearful of. My biggest thing that I've learned, I'm a traditionalist. Like I love rivalries. I love the Pac-12. I love the Rose Bowl. I love what I grew up with. But I do a job where I try to be kind of the voice of reason for sport because of the position that I've been fortunate to be in for the last 30 years. People look at me for, tell me something good, tell me we're going to be okay. And what I've learned that I have to do, and I think you learn this as a parent, but you can't do what I did in 11th grade. Give me a 0. I'm set in my ways. I don't care what you say. I can't do that. I have to, as much as I love the Pac-12, as much as I love Texas, in the Big 12 and Oklahoma down there and, the SEC, looking forward to the Sugar Bowl, like all those old school things, that's not reality anymore. And so I have to change. I have to change. And I'm very open-minded to change. I'm very open-minded, even though it's against the grain of what I want to do. I'm very open-minded to being willing to listen and to understand and try to find a way out of where it's going to be okay. The one thing I've been able to hang my hat on, before I tell you what I'm most afraid of, the one thing I've been able to hang my hat on is as much craziness goes on these last 3 or 4 years, and as much goes on in the off seasons, and as Steve Spurrier would say, talking season, as much as you see on social media and, the sport is going to end, I still go to these games every week. I still have the same job up in the booth, and I look down, and I love the marching bands, and I love I love the student sections. I love the tailgating. I love the scene, and it hasn't changed at all. Like Saturdays, if anything, Saturdays are better. So on one hand where I'm like, NIL, what is transfer portal? UCLA's in the Big Ten? Wait. I got to make sure I get this right. Cal. No, they're not in the Big 12. Cal's and Stanford, they're in the ACC. Okay. It's as much as I'm doing that like everyone else, I still go to these games and I still do college game day, and there's 15, 20,000 people around our set. You know, there's never, I don't think the sport has ever been more healthy on Saturdays with the passion that it enjoys. So I got to be careful of saying the world is ending here because I still see how healthy the sport is. I'd like to think we're getting closer, maybe a year or two away from really getting, our arms around it. But my worst fear is if players can leave the way they do in college basketball after 1 year because they think they're ready. I've covered 2 kids in 30 years that I saw as a freshman, and I thought that guy not only physically could do it, because this isn't basketball. There's calling these NFL games, there is such a difference in physical maturity, emotional maturity. It's just a man's game. It's a whole different game. But Adrian Peterson, when he was at Oklahoma, he was a guy, when he was done his freshman year, I was like, that guy could probably go to the NFL this year. And then ironically, there's a guy right now playing college football, Jeremiah Smith.
I knew you were going to say him,
like those are the only 2 guys that I think, not just their bodies, but their makeup would allow them. That's it. 2 guys in 30 years. And my fear is if Maurice Claret tried to knock that wall down over 20 years ago and didn't do it, but if that wall ever gets knocked down and every player thinks they're ready after 1 year, that I think would officially destroy what we have in college football. So no one ever talks about that. I hope they never bring it up. I shouldn't have even brought it up. But I hope the agents who are behind the scenes in a lot of this, I hope they never challenge that for the kids' sake, because these guys are not ready to make that jump and deal with what they have to deal with. And a lot of them are making as much, if not more money than what they will make in the NFL anyway. So that would be the biggest thing. But man, we've been drinking out of a fire hose for 4 or 5 years with all these changes, realignment, portal, NIL, rev share, President Trump now giving an executive order. The NCAA, after meeting with the Supreme Court, Judge Kavanaugh pretty much just said, don't ever come back or we'll ruin you for good. And at that point, the NCAA was like, we're out. And they really left it up to each conference and the conference commissioners and the presidents within those conferences to make really the big decisions for the sport. So that's why we're governing a sport like it's 1987. And yet the sport used to be a regional sport. If you grew up in that area up in Washington, Washington State and Washington, and man, they were trying to do everything they could to beat each other and beat Oregon and beat USC and go to the Rose Bowl. Like, and if you did, oh my gosh, we're going to the Rose Bowl. And whoever, Michigan or Ohio State, they're trying to get to the Rose Bowl themselves, and it's Big Ten, Pac-10, Big Ten, Pac-12, and that's all you cared about. Well, those days are over. As much as I love the Rose Bowl, those days are over, and we've went from being a regional sport to now we're a national sport. And so what happens in Spokane, what's happening in Gainesville, Florida, or Austin, Texas, or Columbus, Ohio, or wherever, everybody's in tune with each other, yet we have conference commissioners still running it, only concerned about their constituents, their players, their coaches, their ADs. They're not the guy in Mississippi, and Greg Sankey, who runs the SEC. He's not worried about Champaign, Illinois, and the Big Ten. You imagine if the NFL didn't have Roger Goodell, but they had 9 Roger Goodells to try to make decisions for a national football league.
That'd be a lot of booze.
would be, there'd be a lot of booze. Well, you couldn't get anywhere.
Go out on a stage together, it'd be too loud.
Exactly. Yeah. But you'd be spinning your wheels because this conference or this AFC North commissioner thinks this is good for the Steelers, and the NFC South thinks this, and it's like that's what we have. So we don't have a commissioner. We don't have one voice that's trying to govern the nation. We still have individual branches that are trying to look through a lens of the nation, but they're only worried about what's in it for them. And so that's why we can't move forward, because we've not yet found a way to find one voice, one commissioner. And I think until we do that, we're hoping that these conference commissioners will get on the same page and make decisions that help the totality of the sport. So it's messy, man. It's very, very messy.
Yeah, it's fragmented, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned Jeremiah Smith being that guy that you feel like is NFL ready. I was just talking to my friend today, and I had this thought. I was actually doing this video on age versus athleticism. There's all these young sprinters right now that are breaking these 100-meter records. I don't know if you've seen this, heard of it.
No, I haven't.
These last few years have been unlike any other period in history. You have, I believe, the 3 fastest high school times ever in this last 12-month period.
Wow. Wow.
But what's happening is, and this is the question that I haven't seen someone probe into until I started doing this, kind of what launched this video. They're not taking that next step. They're kind of plateauing. There's a stagflation, if you will, right? And you have to wonder like why that is. Like, okay, why is it that there's all these guys that are running 9.9s in high school now? We thought that was impossible, but they're not taking that next step to 9.8, 9.7 in college in an 18 to 22-year-old period. And then I started thinking, okay, but I didn't really see a guy like Jeremiah Smith, in a long time. How much of this is just these kids are getting so developed between 16 and 20 or 16 and 18 now, maybe more than ever before.
For sure.
And, they're just arriving more college ready, if you will. And track's nice because you can just isolate events like that. You can just isolate speed and just be like, okay, it's very clear. These kids are running way faster right now, right? Now you could say the spikes are a little different. Even if you account for that, we have never seen this before. And so, I do wonder if you're going to see that and if that's, part of the Jeremiah Smith equation or if he's just one of one.
I think in his case, he's just kind of a genetic freak. Like he's just a special, he's big, he's fast. He looks like T.O.
Yeah.
He's a nice, hardworking, kind of quiet guy. I know exactly what you're saying because the training, I call it the Earl Woods factor. The Earl Woods factor is Tiger Woods' dad. And all of us, my generation of parenting, we were all having our kids when Earl Woods' story and Tiger Woods' story would come out. And
Tiger parents.
They would show Tiger Woods' hitting on the Merv Griffin show or Johnny whatever show it was, and he's about 3 or 4 years old, and he's perfect golf swing. And then they said, how does he have this swing? Well, we work, all we do is golf. And I think my generation of parenting thought, forget the helicopter parent where you're just, hey, watch out, don't do it. This is called the snowplow parent, where anybody gets in front or in the way of your kid, you're clearing them out of the way. The teacher gives them a bad grade, change schools, change class. The coach doesn't play them the way you want to, the position he wants to play. We're going to change teams. Like they clear the problems out for their son or daughter, and then they specialize and train from the time they're 5, 6, 7, 8, they're on select teams at 9 years old. They're playing 70 games, and some of them get burnt out. Some of them get injured, and a few continue to specialize and train and become 16 years old, and they look like they're a professional athlete because of the amount of training that they've done. While my generation, we were out in the yard just playing. So on one hand, I think you definitely see more developed and much more well-schooled athlete. But I do think they break down easier. I do think they get burnt out, like I said earlier. So I think it's a little bit of a give and take. Yeah, again, having 4 sons, you feel a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses. Like, wait a second, we need a hitting coach. All those other guys that are hitting the way they're hit, they got a hitting coach? Well, you feel like we're getting left behind. I lived it, so I get it. I respect it and appreciate it because it's scary. No, we're not going to do that. And all of a sudden, these other kids, when they're 11 and 12, are killing the ball. You're like, well, we better do that. Or your kid's not quite fast enough. You're like, well, we got to get a speed coach. So I understand it. It's scary. And to get back to your thought, I do think that you're seeing, it's interesting. I didn't know anything about that plateau. They get up there and then they're almost a finished product at 17, as opposed to 10 or 15, 20 years ago. They're a little more raw and there's way more growth and development because a lot of them haven't been coached properly.
You have kids
or they
running
haven't
their fastest times ever at 18, 19. That doesn't make sense.
No, that doesn't make any sense. And again, you'll once in a while just have a guy that he just has it, right? I mean, it's just but I think when it's bunches, I think you're onto something there. And I think it has a lot to do with they're probably ready for the Olympics at 16 and 17 as opposed to 22, 23, 24, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's validity to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's happening in distance too. Yeah, I mean, to kind of come back to that, the college football piece on the fear, one of the things that I've also wondered is, we all live through our own perspectives, right? And we're influenced in ways and we develop a bias, right? So like my bias is growing up in the Spokane Valley, going to Coug games, right? The first game that I went to was Cody Pickett beating the Cougars in triple overtime, that little shit. Jason Gesser got hurt. Matt Cagle came in, and I remember like a week or two later, the game came back on. It was on replay, and I got even more mad. I mean, you used to get so worked up to that prime age. And so,
is that like 01, 02, 03 era?
Yeah, I think so. I want to say it was just after the 2000 year, but the Cougs, it was maybe the best team they had.
Mike Price, they were rolling.
Loaded.
Rolling. Gesser was a bad man.
He was great. Yeah.
And
he hurt his ankle in the first half, and then Washington came back, and it was this crazy game. But
that's always I love that game. By the way, it's always a fun one.
Yeah. It's I maintain it's the only time I've seen my dad cry. It's not at my sporting events. It's when we were at the UW Stadium and they came back. It was Jaden DeLora, beat the Huskies, and he was on the field there, and it's like the only time I've seen my dad cry. I was like, what the heck, Dad? Like, what do we got to do here? I lived through that lens, and so I just wonder, we make fun of the casuals in the sports world all the time, the fans that are casuals all the time.
Yeah.
But of course, from a viewership standpoint and from, what the sport is, a big part of it is the casuals. Can you create this, magnetic force of sorts to bring in somebody to say, I want to watch this even though I'm not a part of it, right? Part of what made Gameday so great. Yeah. It still does. But I just wonder, if you look at that viewership pie, and we don't have these answers right now, but if we go 5-10 years out, and we won't probably have these answers, we have more big games, if you will, but the collective whole is shrinking because you can have two truths in a way, right? And that's, I think, my fear, because there's all these made-up trophies in college football that and maybe there'll be new ones, I don't know. But one of the made-up trophies was it's the last game of the season for the Apple Cup, and you just want to ruin the Husky season. One of the made-up trophies was Sam Darnold loses to Wazoo, right? One of the made-up trophies is your friend down the street went to Arizona, and you finally get a chance to get back together. You haven't seen him in a year, and, we can watch this game together, and hopefully I got something I can talk to him about for the next year. And so I think that's one of the things I worry about, not just from like a feels standpoint, but from also, a business standpoint, if that collective pie is shrinking, but maybe the big games are still big, right? So it's like you could win, if you will, with those bigger games as a network, but the pie could be shrinking because you're maybe just going down to, hey, we got Texas versus Bama. A lot of people are going to watch that. It's not a science.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right. I will say this. I don't have the ratings in front of me. I think because you're a Washington State fan and your family is, if I were you, I would be much more jaded because of what happened to my team. If they would have gone and joined the Big 12, or they would have gone and joined, I don't know, the Big 10 or the ACC, and still would have been in one of those conferences, I personally think that you would still have those. And maybe it's not an Arizona buddy, but maybe it's whoever else is, whatever league you're in. Maybe it's an Ohio State fan if you're in the Big 10, or maybe it's a Michigan fan. And it would be different. It wouldn't be the tradition of what you're used to, but it would be new. But you would still feel like you're part of the club. Unfortunately, with what we've seen so far, and hopefully it's not done, hopefully the Washington States and Oregon States are not going to be left out. But where we are currently is there was like a line that was pretty much drawn when the Pac-12 was decimated. And everyone found a home except for Oregon State and Washington State. So if you ask a Colorado fan, or if you ask a Arizona fan, I bet you they're like, I miss playing in the Pac-12, but we're playing this team and we're playing that team, and and they still have a shot. If they can win their league, they still can mathematically still, get to a playoff. And so I don't blame you for feeling what you feel. I do think, again, from a rating standpoint, the sport has never been bigger and better. And I think right now it's not just the Texas-Alabama matchup. If you compare NBA or MLB or any sport other than the NFL, obviously, I mean, you can put a Thursday night game on and it can be Colorado State and I don't know, Wyoming or whoever it might be. And that game probably will outrate most NBA games, let alone the behemoths, when they play. The one thing is, live TV, live sporting events, meaningful live sporting events still are the only thing that all of us, myself included, you have to watch. Everything else, you just pull it up on, whatever your device is, YouTube or Apple TV, and you miss something, no problem. I just pull up my menu, boom, I watch it later. You can't do that with these games. And so I think from a attendance standpoint, game experience standpoint, rating standpoint, I've been really surprised, because I did think we were going where you were describing Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Alabama, Georgia. They're all going to be fine. But I'm telling you, if you look at the ratings and look at the attendance, the NFL is way up by itself. And the first sport to come close is college football. And then there's a really significant drop. And then you can get into NBA and other sports. So again, it's different. It's not what we're used to. It'll be fun in 5 years, 10 years to kind of see where we are. I don't think we're done yet with this world that's spinning in college football. I don't think we're done with realignment.
Where do you think, because that's one of the things I guess I'm curious about too, is, is there that person that is, concerned? Do you think we'll get that person in place that is concerned about kind of the product that is college football and, preserving it? Do you think that will eventually come where we have a goal of sorts?
I hope. Again, like I said earlier, I think right now that's in the hands of the conference commissioners.
Yeah.
And right now they're pretty myopic in their views and in their decision making. They're worried about their backyard. My hope is that they look at the whole sport and they want to raise the tide for all the ships, not just their own kind of their own world. I don't know who that is. If we get a conference commissioner, if we get a commissioner of the sport, that would be an easy office that would be able to run that. I think people like me, I don't always say the right things, but I do have good intentions. I care about the sport like I care about my kids. I have since I was, as far as I can remember. I love it. And I want the teams in, the Mountain West and now the new Pac-12 and the teams that are left out, like Oregon State and Washington State, who have great traditions in their own right. I want those teams to feel like we fit in here, and we're not there right now. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if eventually it's kind of crazy to think that Cal and Stanford are in the ACC. I don't know if we eventually kind of get to a world where it's almost like, I think Chip Kelly's mentioned this. It's almost like an NFL model where you almost break it down, get back to more regional breakdown where teams kind of stay in their time zone and that's where they play the majority of their football games. And there's some way you can break it down to almost, again, NFL style to get to the postseason. I'm hoping we get there. I just don't know how we're going to get there when we have a lot of people that are, kind of doing this, and they're the ones that are supposed to be leading, and they're not leading the totality. They're leading their own conference, and that's a big concern.
Yeah, there was a lot of conversation about like those two conferences breaking away and maybe starting their own league of sorts. Are we?
I don't see that.
Yeah, I was going to ask if we were still in an environment where you think there's a chance that we have essentially these two conferences, maybe a few others, move over here and say, all right, we're done with the NCAA. We're just going to have our own product over here.
I don't know. I could see there's a lot of talk about the ACC. If you're going to be worried about one future of a conference, of one of the bigger ones, it seems like there was talk this week when Bill Belichick of North Carolina went to the ACC meetings, and there was lots of stories that came out on the back end of that about Carolina's exploring going to the SEC. It's been well documented about Clemson and especially Florida State being frustrated with that league, and that league, who knows what could happen to the ACC down the road. And if that happens, does that lead all these teams in the ACC to find new homes where only a handful find new homes? That could really, what happens to the ACC ultimately could really impact where we go next with, as you're mentioning, is it going to be 2 or 3 conferences and everybody else? Are they going to go create their own world, create their own governing body? I'd like to think it won't become that. You always hear it's going to become 40 or 50 teams in this mega world, and then everybody else that doesn't quite get the invite, they're going to kind of become almost like the FCS, but that group of 4, group of 5, whatever you want to call it, whatever it's going to eventually be. I don't know if we're going to get to that. One week, I think that's where it's headed. Another week, I think, maybe we can avoid it as we sit here, end of July of 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually we're SEC, Big 12, Big 10. But who's in those conferences? Is Washington State and the Oregon States of the world going to get in? What's going to happen to Duke? What's going to happen to Boston College, NC State, Wake Forest? It's one thing to have Miami, Florida State, but what happened? That's a big conference. Where are they all going to go? So what a crazy time. That's all you can really say. And I love the ACC. Like I said, I love the Pac-12. I love the ACC. But right now, if I were an ACC alum or fan, I'd be nervous after all these stories. There's got to be something to all these stories that keep popping up, that eventually some of the big boys in that conference could be leaving. And then what would that leave with the ACC? Can they go get Washington State and Oregon State to try to still bring in recognizable brands to still say, hey, we maybe lost Florida State, maybe we lost Clemson, but hey, let's bring Oregon State in, let's bring Washington State in, and whoever else, just to try to save face and try to still. Big 12's done a pretty good job. Like when they lost Oklahoma and Texas, I was like, I don't know how these guys are going to make it, but boy, they've done about as good a job as you can hope for in bringing in some new brands and some new rivalries, and got BYU in, and now all of a sudden it's like it's pretty competitive, and I think they've. So I don't know if the ACC loses 2 or 3 or 4, can they replace it with recognizable brands and be okay, or is everybody going to jump ship? It's impossible to know, but I think that's the next big story that's going to come along with realignment on the back end of that.
Yeah, that's where you just don't know if it's done yet, right? It doesn't feel like it is, and there's a few more stars that are, pittering out. I guess kind of in that thread of the professionalization of the sport, you've seen this just change over time. This new GM role is fascinating, right? So one thing that all of this does create is, new storylines, new happenings of sorts. And you have this new position that is suddenly very much needed in the general manager. And, coincidentally, your alma mater has this massive collective. They had from what I understand, one of the most expensive rosters last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, you certainly need somebody in that role to kind of decide, okay, where are we slicing this up? Talk about this GM role. Like, what is this general manager? Is it similar to the NFL GM role? How different is it in the college space?
I think it's fairly similar. So for fans that don't understand, and you hear general manager, used to have a recruiting coordinator, and his job forever was to track high school athletes and potential prospects that you could go out and recruit. And he would oftentimes steer the assistant coaches to, depending on each coach would have, if you're up in Washington, there'd be a coach that's in Seattle, maybe 2 coaches that kind of work the Seattle area. And then there's a coach that goes down into Southern California. And so recruiting coordinator, his job was to kind of give the prospects, and here's a list of names, and the coaches would coach, but they would also have to, on the side, they would have to recruit and kind of work these potential prospects as 10th and 11th and 12th graders. And now you have general managers, and general managers have an office that is divided. Now, not everybody does it the same way, but they have an office that is divided when it comes to acquiring talent. And one of those offices is a division that's focused on college players. And they're looking at current players that potentially they could go and get in the portal. And they look at guys that, okay, this guy, and they're focused completely on current college football players, which is bizarre, but that's where we are. And then you have the other part of that office, and they are focused on high school recruits, kind of the old way of doing things. So you have that's going on in a GM's.
Sounding a lot like the NFL GM role.
Yeah. Yeah. Free agency.
Yeah.
Free agency versus, looking at college players. It is like that. The biggest thing that I think a lot of these guys that are now becoming GMs in college have some NFL background is NIL and now rev share. Rev share is, the judge recently came down, and I think it's $20.5 million to an athletic department. And then the athletic department decides, what I'm hearing, 75, 80% of that 20 million goes to football. So now I'm the GM. I've got, 15, $16 million, whatever it is. And I've got a roster of 105 guys, and I've got 15 or 16 million. And that's not NIL, that's rev share. And now I got GM and the head coach got to figure out, okay, our starting quarterbacks, we got to pay him $1.5 million or whatever it is. And they go through the entire roster of who's pressing or who's relevant, or otherwise we might lose them to a higher bidder. So we've got to pay them X amount of dollars in this rev share bucket. Now, the other bucket is NIL. And so there's a clearinghouse now. Before there wasn't. When you would hear Nico's going to Tennessee, you would hear a rumor out of California, $8 million, or Michigan just signed Bryce Underwood. You heard $10 million. Who knows if any of these numbers are real, but you hear these numbers thrown out. Well, that's basically pay for play. What the rev share was supposed to create was the NIL space was now supposed to go through a clearinghouse to make it a legit NIL opportunity. And this is where it's a little bit fuzzy. We don't know if people are going to follow the rules. We don't know if the agents are going to actually abide by a clearinghouse. Will schools abide by a clearinghouse? So anyway, the NIL, as you say, there's a collective. They go out and talk to alumni and donors and boosters, and they try to get guys to donate. I'm hearing Texas Tech, who has a big-time former player who's an oil guy who's got billions of dollars. I'm hearing that their collective maybe raised up to $30 or $40 million. Texas up to $40 million. Ohio State, maybe in that range. Oregon in that range.
To be spent this year.
For this season coming up.
So that's like $300,000 to $400,000 on average per player.
Well, or it's the quarterback makes $3.
Sure, yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? Or Jeremiah Smith. I have no idea. You imagine what it would take, because what happens, what the agents are doing is, if I'm the agent of Jeremiah Smith,
I'm going to go talk over here too.
I'm taking all kinds of calls, and I'm going to Ohio State and saying, "Hey, he wants to stay, but these guys are offering him X amount of dollars. I don't know what to tell him, but." And then Ohio State, that's what happened to Ohio State last year, is a lot of people thought they went out and bought their roster. A lot of it was retaining.
Sure.
If you have a good team, the retaining is more challenging than going out and bringing new players in.
That wide receiver, what was his name again?
From
Ohio State that they brought back, that came back.
Emeka Buka.
Yeah, he came back.
Yeah.
And
the whole defense, they were all 3- and 4-year starters.
Yeah.
Those guys were really the backbone of their team.
Like Jack Sawyer.
And yeah. So they had to really step up before the season started. So I think a lot of their money, they ended up getting Caleb Downs, who was a new player that left Alabama when Nick Saban retired.
And their quarterback,
Will Howard from Kansas State. They got a center from Alabama. But it was most of their money was spent on retaining. And when I talk to these coaches and these GMs, the good programs, that's where they're spending most of their money, because the agents get an All-American or an All-Conference player, and you got another team that's desperate to have that guy, and they'll pay 2 times, 3 times what he's being paid. And now you've got a decision to make. Do we have the space to pay this guy this money? Or are we going to let him go? I mean, it's so strange, but that's their reality.
Yeah.
And now you have the executive order. No idea how, that story just broke. I don't know if that's going to have any impact. Hopefully it will, but
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it can, just because you have, congressional legislation is what moves the needle on that stuff. But the retention, you can just see where that's, obviously such a big part of it. And from what I understand, the rev share, they can divide that up. The schools, that's money coming from the school directly, right?
Yeah.
And so they can divide that up how they want. So are they just like axing like professors in the humanities departments as they do this? Or like, where are they coming up with this money? Say, hey, we don't actually need that philosophy class.
No, see, I need to find out.
These protests anyways. So
exactly. Michael, I don't know that. I need to find out. I'd love to know if that, the billions of dollars that are created through networks, the college football playoff. I don't know if that money that's being paid into these conferences, because they get a a take, no matter whether you go to a bowl game or a championship game or not. Northwestern's getting the same payment that Ohio State is getting in many cases. So, I think, let's say you make $80 million from the relationship that you have in the Big Ten or the SEC. I don't know if they're taking 20 out of that. I have no idea. I need to learn that part of where this rev share money is coming from. But,
it changes so quickly. It can be, it can be hard to, pin it down. And, I'm also just wondering, like these GMs, as they look out to the market and, it's the figuring out, okay, which ones can we maybe get from a transfer standpoint. In basketball, you have guys like Rick Pitino just saying, I'm done with high school. I'm not recruiting in high school anymore.
I saw that. Yeah.
And you just wonder the physicality piece that you mentioned with football. And I looked at this just as very quick anecdote. I looked at Oregon, just locally here, just being able to pull a quick example. They had roughly about 25-ish freshmen, 26 they were signing about 10 years ago or so. And their incoming classes are, naturally about 5, 10 less than that, even with the increase in scholarships that just recently happened. They're making those changes, but you just have to wonder, Texas Tech, it sounds like is really running with this and going out to the transfer portal hard. Are we going to be in a state where these big teams are they're John Mateering? They're saying, hey, what's up, Wazoo? Who do you have? And Wazoo becomes JUCO of sorts. And, more of these teams are just top heavy with upperclassmen because the physicality is so much different between a freshman and senior.
Yeah. Yeah. That to me, that's why I get so frustrated with the concept of a collective. Let's all throw money into the middle of the table. And now, hey, Bowling Green has this all-American or all-conference, right guard. They have no chance of keeping him. Right. And that is awful for me because go back to what name, image, and likeness is. Was it Jeremy Bloom, who was an Olympic skier that played football for Colorado? It was years ago.
I'm not sure.
I don't think he was allowed to have any marketing dollars because he played football, and even though he's an Olympic skier, he couldn't make any money, and that was a big thing. And I don't think anybody at this point has any issue with the concept of name, image, and likeness. Like if Jeremiah Smith can go out through true marketing deals with whoever and make $2 or $3 million off of his name, image, and likeness, great. That's the new world we're in. That I think we can all understand. But the idea of pay for play, the idea of, hey, there's a really good high school player or there's a really good player on Washington State, collectives like, what's it going to take to get him? Or when a recruit at one of these big time programs, all they're talking about is NIL. Like how much are you going to pay me? This school is going to pay me this. They don't talk about the experience. They don't talk about being part of the community and like you go back to your question. What's your biggest fear? My biggest fear for these guys is they look at their college experience like they viewed a 7-on-7 all-star team. It's just one more stop to the NFL. Instead of looking at it like, man, I'm going to meet some people, some donors, some alumni, people that love this school. I love being here. This is my school. And this is where, go talk to any football player that went to the NFL and is done playing. Ask him where home is. 80-90% of them home, where they take their wife or their kids when they want to go to a game, it's the college game. They go back to their college because of the experience that they had. And I think we're teaching these guys that the college experience, like I say, is no different than you're going to make some money. But as far as your loyalty to the university's loyalty to you doesn't exist. Just go in there, bounce around. If you like it, hang out for a little bit. If you don't, bolt. Like that, long term, when these guys are done, whether they make the NFL or not, how is that helping them? Other than getting some quick cash, that is not helping them prepare them for life and to build those relationships that are game changers, So, and I don't think anybody cares about that. Like when I talk like that, I probably sound like I'm from 1975, but I'm being a guy that's taken advantage of that. Like when you go to college, either you take advantage of the school or the school takes advantage of you, because you're on a conveyor belt as a player. Whether it's high school, that conveyor belt ends, college, one school, it ends, new conveyor belt ends, and you're lucky enough to go to the NFL, you're on a new conveyor belt, go to another team, and then eventually it ends. And my point is, while you're on that conveyor belt and people think you're important because you're a good football player, why not be humble and appreciative and allow people to talk to you and you talk back to them and build relationships? And then when that conveyor belt is done, you can go back to the people and be like, yeah, hey, I had a great run. Yeah, I was in the NFL for 5 years. And now you have people to communicate with. And what are you up to now? Well, it's funny you're saying that. I'm trying to get involved in this and that. I remember that when I was in college, I remember talking to you about this. And next thing you know, there's opportunities for you. But these guys, a lot of them don't necessarily, they're not interested in that. And I just think the system is failing them. Like I said, you take advantage of your college experience, or the college experience will take advantage of you. It's up to you to decide. And I think right now the players don't really care about taking it. All they want is the NIL money. They're not taking advantage of the people you meet, the alumni, the boosters, the people that love you while you're quote unquote important. They don't really want to tap into that. Some do, but unfortunately not a lot of them.
Yeah. And money talks. It's very easy for me to, say it's not, where you go to college, how you go to college, right? And I think that still is true. But, the thing I never experienced was someone sitting and saying, hey, we're going to offer you $300,000-$400,000 or $1 million,
right,
to just move over here for a year and wear this uniform. And the part that I come back to is when I played basketball in college, and the big thing everybody would go back and say is, well, I'm going to go play overseas. And that was the end of the conveyor belt for most people, because most people were not NBA players and they knew that.
Yeah.
But, you heard these stories of guys that were making good money overseas. So it was always the answer that you gave. What are you going to do after this? Well, I'm going to go play overseas. And then you learn, actually, okay, yeah, there are people that make it over there, but most people are not going to make much, including myself. You're not going to make much, but you have a great experience. I had a great experience in Spain and England. It was great. But that was the end of the conveyor belt. And I had kind of built up this picture of income. Then you start to realize, okay, that's fuzzy. And then there's guys that I know that are 25 that are still saying, yeah, I'm going to go play overseas. 26, yeah, I'm going to go play overseas, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that conveyor belt, I think, is, definitely one that is a powerful, visual. But at the same time, it's like, I can't, I guess, judge them because it's like, nobody ever threw that money in front of me at 18. It's
100%. Hey man, and 300, 400,000, how about $1 million or $2 million? I mean, I get that, not to mention what you can do for your family. And for a guy like me that didn't come from a whole lot of money, I'm not sitting here trying to be like, oh, how dare you? I'm just trying to say, as a guy that I never played a down in the NFL, never, ever, but I take advantage of my relationship with Ohio State. I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't go to Ohio State. And I'm just trying to say, there are more ways. Why put all of your hopes into that one? Hey, it's great money right now. It's not going to last forever. I promise you. So why put all of your hopes in just that one basket? That's it. It's either I'm going to the NBA or I'm going over to Europe. That's it.
Yeah.
Because from buddies of yours, if you're lucky enough to go over there and kill it at Spain or wherever you go, you get to 25, 27, 28, you're young and you're done. And same thing in college, even though they're making a ton of money, And all of us are like, wow, look at all that money. That's great. Good for them. But what's it leading to? If the end of the day, if we just want to strip it all down, and at least in football, no matter how much money you get in NIL, unless you're investing it wisely, which I'm sure most of these guys, I would be spending it. How could you not at that age? Taking care of my mom, helping pay bills, whatever you got to do. But if you don't get that second generational wealth contract in the NFL, like that second contract, you see what these guys make in free agency. I mean, it's silly money, right? If you don't get that, and what percent of guys are going to get that? So what happens if you just become, I got drafted, first round, second round, third round, great, it's good money. And then you turn out not to be the player that you think you are, which is 98% of them. What do you do? Like
what's next?
What happens?
And even if you do, it's not the end of it. You know, the conversation I just had, I was in the south of France and I interviewed Mike James, who is a guy that went to my junior college. And just speaking with him, I hadn't even thought of this, but I was just asking, what's it like, living here? He's in this beautiful house, making millions of dollars. He's the top EuroLeague scorer of all time. He's playing in the NBA. And it was interesting. He was talking about just meeting like a partner, like meeting and kind of building a relationship. And you could just hear in his voice, there was part of him where it was like, okay, I've been over in Europe for a long time and it seems glamorous. I'm in Monaco. I'm in the south of France.
Yeah.
But I'm also away from everyone that I know and my home. You take a few steps in, you find complexity. There's more to it than just, making money, as, the saying goes, right? But
yeah, and I don't think you realize that until you get a little bit later in life.
You go do it.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see kind of what happens, but the way I guess that I see it is there's really those three ways players are making money. You have the rev share, you have the collectives, and then you have these independent endorsements guys are getting, just traditional NIL in a way.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the GM is splicing those up, those three buckets, and has kind of access to maybe not the third one as much, but is that correct? Right. Maybe where he's saying, okay, I got the rev share and I got the collective, and he's dipping into both those buckets to piece the offer. Is that right?
Yeah. And again, not every school does it the same.
Sure.
But for the most part, and I think some head coaches are involved, and some head coaches, they don't want to be involved. They don't want the player to come into the office and say, how come he's making this and I'm making that? I think some of them are more comfortable saying, well, you got to go down the hall and talk to so-and-so.
Well, that's the Texas Tech guy, isn't it? He's like allowed to offer players, isn't he?
I don't know. I don't know the details on that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
From what I understand, I think John Talty might have said that
okay.
He can just,
okay.
He's basically.
You're talking about the oil guy, the big money
general
guy?
manager they have.
Oh, the GM. Okay.
I think he has, and I'll have to double check that, but I believe he has the ability to make offers to players. Again, I'm not totally.
Yeah.
That's what I remember, but I'll have to double check.
I think most of them are. If you look at successful NFL programs, you have an owner, you have a general manager, you have a head coach, and the great teams, all of them kind of aligned together. They work together. Same philosophy. It's not, he thinks this, they're in cahoots. And I think most college spots, that's if they're going to win, I think the GM and the head coach, they got to be working together. Now, how they communicate with their team and how that happens, I think that's where you're seeing a separate approach. The head coach wants it. Come on into my office. Let's talk about it. He wants to be the guy. And then there's other guys that they'd rather avoid that part, that they're not comfortable talking about the money part. You need to go talk to so-and-so down the hallway about your NIL or about the rev share money. So I don't think it's all, the same, at least in football.
Yeah. What are your expectations for a guy like Archie Manning this year in Texas?
On the field?
Yeah.
I'm I've known Arch since he was a kid. I've watched, I know his family really well. Everything he's ever done they've done it the right way. Even the selection of Texas, I think, was done the right way. They knew Quinn Ewers was there. They were comfortable as a family and putting him somewhere with a great coach and offensive play caller in Sark within a veteran quarterback, because I think they wanted him just to kind of marinate in the background for a year or two. And then by year 3, despite all the hype, and usually those guys are just thrown right into the fryer, despite all that hype, he had a chance to play in a few games last year and just kind of get some experience. So I think he's a different quarterback with anticipation and hype because of how his path went and how intentional the Manning family was in picking Texas. And like I said, a program that had a veteran quarterback. So I'd like to think he's got the physical ability, he's got the makeup, and now he's got a couple years of experience under his belt. Whereas Bryce Underwood, who is a superstar, he's potentially, who knows? They brought in a veteran, Mikey Keene out of Fresno State. So I don't know if he's going to start, but boy, that's a different deal, right? I mean, here comes a true freshman. They paid him whatever they paid him, and he's raw, and whereas Arch Manning, it's like, wow, he's been out there against Georgia. He played in a play or two against Ohio State in a semifinal game and took a big hit, but he's got some experience. So I think, and now he opens up with Ohio State in Columbus. I think not because, well, he's a Manning, not that, but because of his talent and because of the way Sark has brought him along and the players that they have around him and the system that they run. I'd be shocked if he doesn't have a great year. Just shocked. Yeah. I think he'll be a fun story. If his name was, Johnson, I think he would be a great story because most of these 5-star all-world guys, a lot of times there's pressure to play them. In this case, name another 5-star guy like that with that much hype that sat around for a couple years. You just can't think of him anymore. So
no,
I think it's going to work out really well for him.
Yeah, I mean, that running quarterback too, I mean, it's just this new age. It makes me wonder, man, like, were you just the wrong generation?
Exactly.
I mean,
I would have loved this generation.
You were a wishbone guy, weren't you?
Yeah, I was a wishbone. Okay. Yeah, option guy.
Yeah.
This is a great era. If you're a dual guy, this is your era.
Yeah.
This is perfect. And Arch, as you just mentioned, I think people think of Eli and
yeah,
Peyton,
he's different.
But you think of Archie, his grandfather, and his dad, Coop. Those guys are great athletes, fleet-footed, and he definitely got that gene. I mean, he can go, and that's going to be a totally different dynamic. They really haven't seen from a Sark offense in a number of years. So it'll be fun to see how that unfolds this year.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it all sounds exciting, and appreciative of you giving your time here and sharing your insights. But thank you. And thanks again for the conversation here today, man.
Oh, yeah. Hey, thank you. I'm a big fan of what you do and the style in which you do it. So happy to hop on with you. Hope you have a great, I know you do a lot of different sports, but I hope you have a great fall, and hopefully we can connect again.
Absolutely, man. Hope you enjoyed this conversation with Kirk Herbstreit. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and take care.